The crystal chandelier above the Riverside Country Club's grand ballroom cast rainbow prisms across my sister Madison's face as she held up her left hand, letting the light catch her 3-carat engagement ring. The entire wedding party had gathered for her final dress fitting, and she was in her element, commanding attention like a conductor leading an orchestra of admiration. "Emma, darling," Madison cooed, her voice dripping with that particular brand of sisterly condescension I'd grown to recognize over 28 years. "You really should start thinking about your future. I mean, Jake seems sweet, but let's be realistic about what kind of wedding you'll be able to afford." She gestured grandly at the opulent ballroom around us, where her wedding would take place in just 2 weeks. This is what happens when you marry well. Trevor's family has standards. I stood there in my simple blue dress, watching as our mother, Linda, nodded approvingly, and our father, Robert, adjusted his tie uncomfortably. Madison's friends Ashley and Brittany giggled behind their champagne flutes. I felt that familiar sting of being the sensible sister, the one who worked at a small tech startup while Madison had landed herself a Blackwood heir. "Don't worry about Emma," Madison continued, her voice carrying across the marble floors. "She'll probably have a lovely little ceremony at Sunset Beach Park. Very modest. Very her." The laughter that followed felt like tiny needles pricking my skin. "I just hope she doesn't expect us to help with costs. Trevor and I will be busy with our honeymoon in the Maldives." What Madison didn't know as she preened in her designer gown was that hidden in my purse was something that would change everything. A small velvet box containing a ring that would make her 3-carat diamond look like a child's toy. What she didn't know was that the small tech startup she'd been mocking for years had just been acquired by a major corporation for an amount that would fund 100 weddings like hers. What she didn't know was that I'd been playing a very different game all along, but I wasn't ready to reveal my cards yet. I simply smiled, squeezed Jake's hand, and said, "You're right, Madison. We all have different priorities." The patronizing pat on my shoulder that followed made my jaw clench, but I kept my expression serene. 2 more weeks, I told myself. 2 more weeks of being underestimated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Sullivan household on Maple Street meant living in Madison's shadow from the moment I could walk. She was 3 years older, naturally beautiful, with cascading blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, and possessed an innate ability to charm anyone within a 5-foot radius. I was the quiet one, the bookish brunette who preferred coding to cheerleading, who spent weekends building websites instead of building social media followings. Our parents, Robert and Linda, never intended to play favorites. But Madison's magnetic personality made it easy for her to become the center of attention at every family gathering. She was homecoming queen at Riverside High, graduated with a communications degree that she parlayed into a social media influencing career, had a talent for dating men who treated her like the princess she believed herself to be. I, on the other hand, earned a computer science degree, worked 16-hour days learning app development, and dated Jake, a genuinely kind man who taught high school mathematics and drove a sensible Honda Civic. The contrast between our lifestyles became more pronounced after Madison met Trevor Blackwood at a charity gala 2 years ago. Trevor came from old California money, the kind of family that owned vineyards and had their names on hospital wings. His proposal had been orchestrated like a Hollywood production, complete with a private helicopter ride over the coastline and a photographer, capturing every moment from Madison's Instagram feed. The engagement party alone cost more than most people's annual salaries. Meanwhile, Jake and I had been together for 4 years, living in a modest apartment near downtown Riverside, splitting groceries and saving money for what we assumed would be a simple wedding when the time came. Madison never missed an opportunity to remind me of our different circumstances, usually disguised as sisterly concern. "Emma, you work so hard," she'd say during family dinners. "It's just a shame that passion doesn't always translate to profit. But look at you, so dedicated to your little apps." What Madison couldn't see was the late nights I spent not just coding but building something revolutionary. What she missed were the meetings with investors, the patent applications, the careful negotiations with major tech companies who'd been circling my artificial intelligence platform like sharks, sensing blood in the water. She saw only her little sister hunched over a laptop playing with computers while she planned the social event of the season. The irony wasn't lost on me that Madison's entire online presence was built on platforms that people like me had created. She commanded audiences of hundreds of thousands, showcasing her lifestyle and promoting products with the kind of influence that made brands willing to pay prem rates for her endorsement. Yet she viewed my work as a hobby, something to keep me busy until I found a real career or married someone who could support me properly. Jake knew about my project, of course. He'd been my cheerleader through every late night and every rejection from early investors who couldn't see the potential in what I was building. He understood that my quiet demeanor masked an ambition that burned just as brightly as Madison's, but in a completely different direction. While she sought spotlight and admiration, I sought innovation and independence. While she married into wealth, I was creating it from scratch. The morning of Madison's dress fitting, I'd received the call that changed everything. The acquisition was final, the contract signed, and the wire transfer that would arrive in my account within 48 hours contained more zeros than Madison had probably ever seen in one place. But more than the money, it was the validation. That years of sacrifice and dedication had culminated in something meaningful, something that would impact millions of users worldwide. Standing in that ballroom, listening to Madison's casual cruelty disguised as sisterly advice, I felt a calm settle over me that I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards, and my sister had no idea the game had already changed. The Sullivan family dynamics had been set in stone since childhood, carved into our daily routines like grooves in an old record player. Every Sunday, we gathered at the family home on Maple Street for what Mom called family time. But what really functioned as Madison's weekly performance showcase. She would arrive fashionably late, always with some dramatic story about her week, her latest brand collaboration, or her wedding planning adventures that required everyone's immediate attention and admiration. I had learned early to accept my role as the supporting character in Madison's ongoing production. While she regaled the family with tales of exclusive events and designer shopping trips, I would help Mom in the kitchen, listen to Dad's concerns about his accounting firm, or play board games with our younger cousins when they visited. It wasn't that I minded being helpful. There was something exhausting about consistently being treated as the reliable background presence while Madison commanded center stage. Jake often wondered why I continued participating in these weekly gatherings when they clearly left me drained. "You don't owe them your Sunday afternoons," he'd say, gently as we drove home from particularly difficult family dinners. But he didn't understand the complex web of guilt and loyalty that bound me to these rituals. Mom would worry if I missed too many gatherings. Dad would ask if everything was okay between Madison and me, and Madison herself would create dramatic narratives about family discord that somehow always positioned her as the victim of my unreasonable behavior. The truth was that I genuinely loved my family, even when they frustrated me beyond measure. Dad had worked tirelessly to build his small accounting practice from nothing, often staying late into the evening during tax season to ensure his clients received the best possible service. Mom had raised 2 daughters while managing the administrative side of Dad's business, somehow maintaining her cheerful disposition despite the financial stress that occasionally kept my parents awake at night. They were good people who had created a stable, loving home, even if they sometimes struggled to understand why their daughters had turned out so differently. Madison's relationship with money had always been complicated. She possessed an intuitive understanding of how to leverage her appearance and personality into financial opportunities, but she also carried an underlying anxiety about maintaining her lifestyle that manifested in increasingly expensive tastes and a desperate need for external validation. Her social media presence required constant investment in clothes, experiences, and professional photography that ate into her earnings faster than she could generate them. Trevor's family wealth offered her the security she craved, but it also amplified her existing tendency to measure worth through material possessions. My own relationship with money was entirely different. Having watched Dad struggle through economic downturns and Mom worry about unexpected expenses, I had developed a deep appreciation for financial independence and long-term security. Every dollar I earned from freelance coding projects during college had been carefully saved or invested. When I finally launched my startup, I lived on ramen noodles and generic coffee for months to stretch my seed funding as far as possible. The irony that Madison viewed my frugality as evidence of failure rather than strategic planning wasn't lost on me. Jake and I had built our relationship on shared values that had nothing to do with wealth or status. We both taught ourselves new skills voraciously, spent weekends hiking local trails or exploring farmers markets, and found genuine joy in simple pleasures like cooking dinner together or reading the same book so we could discuss it afterward. Our apartment might have been small, but it felt like home in ways that Madison's perfectly curated spaces never seemed to. When Jake proposed to me 6 months ago with his grandmother's vintage ring during a sunset walk at Sunset Beach Park, I had felt richer than any amount of money could make me. The engagement had been another source of gentle mockery from Madison, who couldn't understand why anyone would choose a used ring when they could have something new and impressive. She had spent considerable time during family dinners explaining the importance of carat weight, clarity ratings, and designer settings, apparently convinced that she was educating me about standards I should aspire to meet. The fact that Jake's grandmother's ring held sentimental value and unique craftsmanship seemed irrelevant to her worldview, where bigger automatically meant better. What Madison didn't realize was that her constant commentary about my life choices had been accidentally motivating me for years. Every dismissive comment about my career prospects had pushed me to work harder on developing my skills. Every suggestion that I should find a more financially stable partner had reinforced my determination to achieve my own financial independence. Every implication that my modest lifestyle reflected limited ambition had fueled my drive to create something meaningful and lasting. The artificial intelligence platform I had been developing wasn't just a career achievement. It was a solution to real problems that affected millions of people. The application could analyze complex data patterns and provide insights that helped small businesses optimize their operations, healthcare providers improve patient outcomes, and educational institutions personalize learning experiences. The potential impact excited me far more than any diamond ring or luxury vacation ever could. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During the past 2 years of Madison's relationship with Trevor, I had watched her transform into an even more exaggerated version of herself. The woman who had once genuinely cared about social causes now posted performative content about charity, events she attended primarily for networking opportunities. The sister who used to call me when she was upset about work or relationships now only contacted me when she needed someone to admire her latest purchase or validate her wedding planning decisions. Trevor himself remained something of a mystery. To our family, he was polite during gatherings, appropriately charming with Mom, and respectful toward Dad. But there was a calculated quality to his interactions that made me uncomfortable. He spoke about Madison the way someone might discuss a prized possession, with pride in ownership rather than genuine affection for her personality or interests. When he talked about their future together, his focus remained consistently on the lifestyle they would maintain rather than the relationship they would build. The upcoming wedding had consumed Madison's attention so completely that she seemed incapable of discussing any other topic for more than 5 minutes. Every conversation somehow circled back to flower arrangements, catering menus, or guest list. Politics. She had appointed herself the family expert on wedding planning despite having no previous experience, offering unsolicited advice about timeline management and vendor selection that assumed I would naturally want to replicate her choices. When my time came, what she couldn't have predicted was that my time had already come, and the ring waiting in my apartment safe would redefine everything she thought she knew about my capabilities and my future. The Blackwood family occupied a social stratosphere that most Riverside residents could only observe from a distance, like studying distant stars through a telescope. Trevor's parents, Charles and Vivian Blackwood, owned the largest vineyard in Sonoma County, served on the boards of 3 major charities, and hosted an annual gala that attracted celebrities and politicians from across California. Their estate sprawled across 40 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with a guest house larger than most people's primary residences, and a wine cellar that had been featured in Architectural Digest. When Madison first brought Trevor to a family dinner 18 months ago, the contrast between our modest dining room and his usual environment was painfully obvious. He had politely complimented Mom's pot roast while checking his phone periodically, asked Dad thoughtful questions about tax preparation that clearly demonstrated he had never needed to worry about such mundane concerns, and smiled at Madison with the indulgent affection of someone accustomed to being adored by beautiful women. Throughout the evening, I watched my sister transform into an even more polished version of herself, speaking more softly, laughing more delicately, and positioning herself as the perfect complement to his refined sophistication. The Blackwood family's wealth wasn't flashy or nouveau rich. It was the kind of established prosperity that whispered rather than shouted. Trevor drove a Tesla because it was environmentally responsible, not because he needed to impress anyone. His watch was vintage and understated, inherited from his grandfather rather than purchased to display success. When he spoke about money, it was with the casual indifference of someone who had never experienced financial insecurity. Discussing investments and property acquisitions, the way other people talked about weekend plans, Madison's integration into this world had required significant adjustments to her lifestyle and priorities. The influencer career that had once seemed glamorous suddenly appeared gauche next to Evian's subtle elegance and understated luxury. Madison began declining brand partnerships that didn't align with the Blackwood family's sophisticated image, focusing instead on collaborations with high-end fashion houses and luxury travel companies that enhanced rather than diminished her social standing. Her Instagram aesthetic shifted from bold and attention-grabbing to refined and aspirational, each post carefully curated to reflect her elevated circumstances. The wedding planning process had become Madison's full-time obsession, an elaborate production designed to announce her arrival in Riverside's upper social circles. She had hired Patricia Williams, the most exclusive wedding planner in the county, whose client list included technology executives and entertainment industry moguls. The guest list read like a directory of local power brokers, carefully balanced between Trevor's family connections and Madison's desire to showcase her own social climbing achievements. Every detail, from the imported Italian linens to the custom cocktail menu featuring spirits from the Blackwood vineyard, had been selected to reinforce the message that this was not merely a wedding, but a social event of significant importance. Uncle Mike, Dad's younger brother who worked in construction, had expressed private concerns about the wedding's extravagance during a recent family barbecue. "Seems like a lot of pressure on a young marriage," he had murmured to Dad while Madison described her plans for a 7-course dinner featuring ingredients flown in from France. "In my day, we focused more on the partnership than the party." Dad had nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing, unwilling to dampen Madison's enthusiasm or question Trevor's family's approach to celebrating their union. Mom had thrown herself into wedding preparations with the dedication of a general planning a military campaign, attending dress fittings and cake tastings with religious devotion despite being clearly overwhelmed by the sophistication and expense of Madison's choices. She had quietly taken out a small loan to cover the mother of the bride dress Madison had selected for her, a designer creation that cost more than Mom typically spent on clothing in an entire year. When I discovered this during a casual conversation about finances, I had offered to contribute to the cost, but Mom had firmly declined, insisting that supporting Madison's special day was her privilege as a mother. The social dynamics surrounding the wedding had created visible stress fractures within our extended family and friend network. Several of Dad's longtime clients had been invited primarily because Trevor's family expected a certain guest count, leading to awkward conversations about gift expectations and dress codes that left our family friends feeling uncertain about their place in the celebration. Madison's high school friends found themselves competing for positions in the wedding party based on their Instagram followings and social connections, rather than the depth of their relationships with the bride. Trevor's groomsmen represented a carefully curated collection of prep school friends, business associates, and family connections who moved through Riverside social events like a coordinated unit. They spoke in the confident tones of men who had never questioned their place in the world, discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes with the casual familiarity of shared privilege. During the bachelor party weekend in Napa, they had spent more on wine tastings and private dining experiences than Jake and I typically budgeted for an entire month, posting photos that showcased their effortless sophistication and expensive tastes. Ashley and Brittany, Madison's closest friends since college, had initially been thrilled by their association with Riverside's newest power couple. However, as wedding plans intensified, their enthusiasm had begun to wane under the pressure of matching Madison's elevated lifestyle expectations. The bridesmaid dresses alone cost each woman nearly $1,000, and the bachelorette party itinerary included spa treatments and dining experiences that stretched their budgets beyond comfort. Their group chat, which I occasionally glimpsed, when Madison left her phone unlocked, revealed growing resentment disguised as supportive enthusiasm. The financial reality of the wedding remained a carefully guarded secret, but based on casual comments from various family members, I estimated the total cost exceeded what many families earned in an entire year. Trevor's parents had generously offered to cover the majority of expenses, but Madison's insistence on contributing to certain elements had created significant strain on our family's resources. Dad had been working longer hours to generate additional income, and Mom had postponed several home improvement projects to redirect funds toward wedding-related expenses. What troubled me most wasn't the money itself, but the way the wedding had become a vehicle for Madison to distance herself from her own family and background. She spoke about Riverside as if it were a quaint hometown she was outgrowing rather than the community that had shaped and supported her throughout her life. Her comments about future family gatherings suggested that she expected our parents to adapt to her new social requirements rather than maintaining the comfortable traditions that had always brought us together. Transformation in Madison's personality had been gradual, but unmistakable. The sister who had once called me for advice about career decisions now sought validation only from Trevor's social circle. The woman who had genuinely celebrated my academic achievements now viewed my professional success through the lens of financial comparison rather than personal pride. Our relationship had evolved from sisterly competition to something that felt more like class warfare, with Madison positioned as the clear victor in a contest I hadn't realized we were having. Jake had begun declining invitations to wedding-related events after a particularly uncomfortable evening where Trevor's friends had spent the entire dinner discussing investment strategies and property acquisitions, while completely ignoring any attempts at conversation from those of us who worked for salaries rather than trust funds. "I don't think they're trying to be rude," Jake had said afterward, "but they literally cannot relate to anyone who doesn't share their background." His observation had been generous but accurate, highlighting the growing divide between Madison's new world and the life she was leaving behind. The irony of Madison's social climbing efforts was that she remained fundamentally insecure despite her elevated circumstances. Her constant need for reassurance about wedding details and her obsessive monitoring of social media engagement suggested that she feared losing her place in this new world as much as she had once feared remaining trapped in her old one. A woman who appeared supremely confident in her designer clothes and luxury accessories still sought approval with the desperate intensity of someone who had never quite convinced herself that she truly belonged among the people she was trying so hard to impress. The first crack in Madison's perfect wedding facade appeared during what should have been a routine family dinner 3 months before the ceremony. We were gathered around Mom's dining table, the same oak piece that had hosted countless birthday celebrations and holiday meals throughout our childhood. When Madison casually mentioned that she and Trevor had decided to honeymoon in Europe for 6 weeks rather than the originally planned 2-week trip to Hawaii. 6 weeks, Mom repeated, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Won't that be expensive?" Madison waved dismissively, her new diamond tennis bracelet catching the overhead light. "Trevor's parents insisted on upgrading our plans," they said. "Hawaii was too pedestrian for a Blackwood honeymoon. We'll be touring vineyards in France, staying at their friend's villa in Tuscany, and finishing with a week in Switzerland at some resort that's been in Charles's family for generations. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. But what about work? Can you both take that much time off? The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Trevor shifted in his chair, and I noticed Madison's smile tighten almost imperceptibly. Well, Trevor doesn't exactly work in the traditional sense, she said carefully. He manages the family investments and oversees some of their philanthropic initiatives. It's a very flexible schedule. What she didn't mention, but what had become increasingly obvious to those paying attention, is that Madison's own income had become virtually non-existent since her engagement. The influencer partnerships that had once provided her with a steady stream of revenue had dried up as she'd become more selective about brand alignments. And her attempts to pivot toward luxury lifestyle content had failed to generate the engagement rates that advertisers demanded. Jake caught my eye across the table, his expression reflecting my own growing concern about the financial sustainability of Madison's new lifestyle. During our drive home that evening, he voiced what we'd both been thinking. Something doesn't add up with their money situation. Trevor's family has wealth, sure, but Madison talks like they have unlimited resources. That's not how even wealthy families typically operate. His observation proved prescient when Uncle Mike called Dad the following week with disturbing news. Mike's construction company had been hired to complete some renovation work at the Blackwood estate. He'd overheard conversations between Charles and the property manager about cash flow concerns related to some failed investments. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, Mike had said, but I heard Charles on the phone with someone about liquidating assets to cover unexpected losses. Sounded pretty serious. The revelation created a ripple of worry through our family, though nobody wanted to voice their concerns directly to Madison. Mom began making subtle inquiries about wedding expenses, asking if there was anything our family could do to help reduce costs. Dad started staying later at the office, taking on additional clients to build a financial cushion in case Madison needed emergency assistance. I found myself lying awake at night, wondering if my sister had any idea that her fairy tale might be built on increasingly shaky foundations. Madison's behavior during this period became more erratic and defensive. She snapped at Mom for suggesting a less expensive flower arrangement, accused Dad of being unsupportive when he asked practical questions about their post-wedding housing plans, and began avoiding family gatherings when the conversations turned toward financial topics. Her social media posts became more frequent and more lavish, as if she could manifest stability through digital documentation of her luxurious lifestyle. The tension reached a breaking point during a bridesmaid dress fitting at an exclusive boutique. In downtown San Francisco, I had driven up with Ashley and Brittany to support Madison, despite feeling uncomfortable about the expense and formality of the event. The dresses themselves were stunning but impractical, custom-designed pieces that would never be worn again and cost more than most people's monthly rent. During the fitting, Madison received a phone call that she took privately in the boutique's consultation room. Through the thin walls, we could hear her voice rising in pitch and intensity, though the specific words remained unclear. When she returned, her face was flushed and her hands were trembling slightly. But she insisted everything was fine and rushed through the remaining appointments with forced enthusiasm. Ashley later confided that she'd heard fragments of the conversation, including references to wedding vendor payments and insufficient funds. The revelation that Madison might be struggling financially while maintaining her elaborate wedding plans created an uncomfortable dynamic among her friends, who were already feeling stretched by the expensive bridesmaid requirements and pre-wedding events. My own financial situation during this period was creating its own form of stress, though for entirely different reasons. The acquisition negotiations for my startup had entered their final phases, requiring countless hours of due diligence, meetings, legal document reviews, and strategic planning sessions. The potential value of the deal had exceeded even my most optimistic projections, but the process demanded absolute confidentiality until all contracts were finalized. Sarah Chen, my best friend since college, and now a successful corporate attorney, had been helping me navigate the legal complexities of the acquisition. She understood the irony of my situation better than anyone. watching me sit through family dinners where Madison made condescending comments about my modest lifestyle, while I carried signed term sheets in my purse that would fundamentally change my financial circumstances. "You're handling this with incredible grace," Sarah had said after a particularly difficult family gathering where Madison had openly wondered whether Jake and I would ever be able to afford children. "I don't know how you're keeping quiet about the acquisition." The truth was that maintaining secrecy had become almost meditative, a daily practice in patience and strategic thinking. Every dismissive comment from Madison, every pitying look from Trevor's friends, every assumption about my limited prospects served to reinforce my determination to let the eventual revelation speak for itself rather than defending my choices. Prematurely, Jake had been my anchor throughout this challenging period, providing emotional support while respecting the confidentiality requirements that prevented me from sharing specific details about the business negotiations. He could see the stress I was carrying, but trusted my judgment about timing and disclosure. His steady presence reminded me that true partnership didn't require constant validation or public display, lessons that seemed increasingly relevant. As Madison's relationship faced mounting pressures, the most troubling development was Madison's growing isolation from her support network. As wedding stress intensified and financial pressures mounted, she began pushing away the friends and family members who might have offered practical assistance or emotional comfort. Her communications became increasingly one-sided. It focused on wedding logistics rather than personal connection, and she seemed genuinely surprised. When people expressed concern about her well-being rather than admiration for her planning abilities, the final warning sign came during a family barbecue when Trevor arrived alone, explaining that Madison was dealing with some vendor issues and would join us later. He spent the afternoon fielding phone calls and appearing increasingly agitated, at one point stepping into Dad's study for what sounded like a heated conversation with someone about payment schedules and contract modifications. Madison never appeared at the barbecue, and when Mom called to check on her that evening, she claimed to have food poisoning and asked not to be disturbed. The excuse felt transparent, especially given the timing, but nobody wanted to push for details that Madison clearly wasn't ready to share. As summer progressed toward the August wedding date, the contrast between Madison's public confidence and private anxiety became impossible to ignore. She had constructed an elaborate performance around her perfect life and perfect wedding, but the foundation was showing cracks that threatened to bring down the entire production. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly building toward a revelation that would reshape everything our family thought they knew about success, security, and the true meaning of wealth. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing final acquisition documents in my apartment office. Jake had already left for school, and the summer sunlight was streaming through our modest windows when my phone buzzed with Madison's name. Her voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable from the confident tone she'd maintained throughout her engagement. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and please don't make this weird," she began, the words tumbling out faster than usual. "Do you think Jake would be willing to lend Trevor and me some money, just temporarily, until after the wedding when things settle down?" I set down my coffee cup carefully, processing the unexpected request. Madison had never asked me for financial help in our entire adult lives. If anything, she'd spent years implying that I was the one who might eventually need assistance from more successful family members. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. There was a long pause before Madison answered. "Maybe 15,000? I know that sounds like a lot, but some of our vendors are demanding final payments earlier than expected, and Trevor's trust fund distribution got delayed due to some legal complications with his grandfather's estate. $15,000 represented more than Jake's entire annual savings from his teaching salary. The fact that Madison assumed we might have that amount readily available revealed how little she actually knew about our financial situation, despite years of commentary about our modest lifestyle. "Madison, that's a significant amount of money," I said slowly. "What exactly is going on with the wedding payments?" Her defensive response came immediately. "Nothing's going on. This is just temporary cash flow management. Trevor's family has plenty of money, but some of it is tied up in investments that can't be liquidated quickly." This is how wealthy families operate, Emma. You wouldn't understand the complexities. The condescension in her voice triggered something cold and sharp in my chest. Us. Even while asking for help, Madison couldn't resist emphasizing the supposed sophistication gap between her circumstances and mine. She was literally requesting financial assistance while simultaneously lecturing me about my inability to comprehend wealth management. "I'll need to discuss this with Jake," I replied. $15,000 would require us to liquidate most of our emergency savings. "Of course, talk to Jake," Madison said quickly. "But please don't mention this to Mom and Dad. They're already stressed about wedding expenses, and I don't want them to worry unnecessarily. This is just a minor timing issue." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet apartment, staring at the acquisition contracts spread across my desk. The irony was so profound it almost felt fictional. Madison was asking me to empty my savings account to fund her wedding while I sat surrounded by paperwork that would make me wealthier than she could imagine. The acquisition would close in less than 48 hours, transforming my net worth overnight. But she had no idea that her supposedly struggling little sister was about to become one of the youngest self-made millionaires in Riverside. When Jake came home that afternoon, I shared Madison's request without revealing the full context of our own changing circumstances. His reaction was exactly what I'd expected: immediate concern for Madison's well-being combined with practical worry about our ability to help without jeopardizing our own security. "Something's seriously wrong if they need that much money this close to the wedding," he said, loosening his tie and sitting beside me on our second-hand couch. "Either Trevor's family isn't as wealthy as they've implied, or there are financial problems they haven't shared with anyone. We decided to offer $5,000. The maximum amount we could reasonably spare from our existing savings without creating hardship for ourselves." When I called Madison back with our decision, her response revealed the depth of her desperation and the extent of her detachment from financial reality. "5,000, she repeated, as if I'd offered pocket change. "Emma, I need 15,000. Can't you take out a personal loan or something? This is my wedding we're talking about." The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. She was asking me to go into debt to fund her celebration while dismissing our generous offer as inadequate. The woman who had spent years mocking my modest lifestyle now expected me to sacrifice my financial stability for her social aspirations. "Madison, $5,000 is what we can afford to lend you," I said firmly. "If that's not sufficient, you might need to consider reducing some wedding expenses or asking Trevor's family for assistance." Her response was immediate and cutting. "Forget it. I should have known you wouldn't really be there when I needed you. This is exactly why I worry about your future. Emma, you're so focused on being careful with money that you can't see the bigger picture." The call ended, abruptly leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Madison had somehow transformed her financial crisis into evidence of my personal failings, managing to maintain her superior attitude even while begging for help. The psychological gymnastics required for such cognitive dissonance would have been impressive if they weren't so infuriating. That evening, Sarah called with the news I'd been waiting for. "All documents are signed and filed. The wire transfer will hit your account tomorrow morning. Congratulations, Emma. You're officially a very wealthy woman." As I hung up the phone, I looked around our small apartment with new eyes.
Tomorrow?
Everything would change. Tomorrow, I could write Madison a check for $15,000 without even noticing the expense. Tomorrow, I could buy a house, start a foundation, or invest in any opportunity that interested me. But tonight, I was still the little sister who couldn't understand wealth management, still the woman whose financial caution supposedly limited her vision. The acquisition announcement would be public within a week, accompanied by press coverage. That would make my success impossible to ignore. Madison's wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday, exactly 1 week after my transformation from struggling entrepreneur to tech industry success story would become public knowledge. I spent the evening planning my strategy for the revelation, knowing that timing would be everything. The ring Jake and I had selected together months ago waited in our bedroom safe. A custom-designed piece featuring a rare pink diamond that would make Madison's engagement ring look like costume jewelry, But the ring was just a symbol. The real surprise was the woman I'd become while everyone else was busy underestimating me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.